Well, hello, Soundside Church. Pastor Aaron coming to you tonight and right here to your community group in particular. Well, you should have read Joshua chapter 8. I admit it was a bit of a longer reading, maybe kind of a twisted, confusing reading at points, but here I am, your video tour guide, to try to help make a little bit of sense about this chapter that describes Joshua and the Israelites conquering the city of Ai. And I think we should just go ahead and start by talking about the fact that it's called Ai. And that's going to actually be a little significant for us because in the ancient Hebrew, the word Ai means heap or ruins. Now, we have not been able to discover through archaeological studies where the town of Ai actually was. However, we have been able to locate what we think is the town of Bethel, which you read about here in Joshua chapter 8. And we've found a town not too far, or found some ruins not too far to the east of Bethel. And today that spot is called Et Tel, which means heap or ruins. That's right. When we read about Joshua conquering the town of Ai at the end, we find that it turned into a heap of ruins, and it is still that way today. So I think it's so interesting that that is the actual name of the town, Heap and Ruins, although I think it might be a little unlikely that they would have named the town that. And as a matter of fact, as we really look at the story, maybe it wasn't a town at all. You say, what do you mean it wasn't a town at all? I mean this. I mean that when we read the story here, we read about them fighting against the town or the city of Ai. But we read this really weird phrase in verse 17 that said, not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. They left the city open and pursued Israel. What in the world does that mean? Why would there be people from Bethel in Ai? Especially when they were several miles apart, Bethel being to the west of Ai, especially since there was an ambush placed between the cities. Well, I think it's fair to say, and I think that commentators and archaeologists kind of back me up on this, I think it's fair to say that Ai probably wasn't a city in its own right so much as a military outpost of the town or city of Bethel. Probably a pretty strong outpost, but it makes a little bit of sense since Ai was kind of located at the plateau or escarpment overlooking the Jordan River Valley. And so if an army was going to be crossing, if an invading force was going to be coming into the land from the east, Ai would have been the first town that they encountered, and as we read, it was. But it would have been bolstered by troops from Bethel. Interestingly enough, we don't read in the book of Joshua of the Israelites conquering Bethel, most likely because their army was wiped out in this particular battle. We do read about Bethel being conquered later on in the book of Judges, but that would have been much, much later on. So, Ai, kind of an interesting place, kind of an interesting battle, and we read about the battle plan in the first part of this chapter. Now, the way the battle plan goes is instead of sending 3,000 men, Joshua is going to send 30,000 men, and I don't think that the number is accidental. I think that there is a very clear indication that whatever they did before, where they lost the battle, they're going to send 10 times that many troops. In fact, God tells Joshua to send all of them. And Joshua does eventually end up sending all of them in obedience to God. In fact, God crafts the battle plan for this in a way that he didn't do last week. And I think that's very, very significant. Well, anyway, so the battle plan is we're going to send a force in the night before the battle occurs. They're going to set themselves up an ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. And then the next day, Joshua and the rest of the army are going to come up and they're going to go to the north side of the city. They're coming from the east, but they're going to go to the north side of the city. And there's a ravine between the city and where the main force is encamped. Now, here we have a little bit of an issue with Joshua chapter 8 because in verse 3, we read that Joshua sent 30,000 men to sit in ambush between Bethel and Ai. And then we read down here in verse 12 that he sent 5,000 men. Now, commentators and scholars have kind of wrestled with this to try to figure out the difference between the two numbers. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw out the idea that this is a mistake. Okay, just a presupposition right there. I'm also going to throw out the idea that we're just trying to stitch together two competing oral traditions into one, unified narrative. I'm going to throw that out too, because I think that if that was the case, the author could have done a much better job. How do we reconcile 30,000 with 5,000? Well, I think there are a number of ways that we can do that without suggesting that there's an error or a mistake in the Bible. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I think that there are a couple of ways would be to say that when we read 30,000, we're reading about the initial plan, and what ended up happening was 5,000 went. We could also explain it in terms of translation, in saying that that word thousand doesn't always mean thousand. Sometimes it means group or company. Maybe we're looking at the idea of 30 companies of soldiers that totaled up to 5,000 soldiers. That could be one possible explanation. Another explanation, and honestly, I think that this one is plausible, and that is that Joshua did send 30,000 advanced troops to go set themselves up an ambush. But the next day, when Joshua went in the main force, he sent a messenger to the 30,000 and pulled most of them with him, drawing the attention of any spies or scouts from Ai. Now, we don't get all those details in the text, but I think we can reconstruct it in a way that actually makes a little bit of sense, because a force of 30,000 people trying to hide would have been a very difficult thing to do. And so maybe the 30,000 was just to get their attention, and then the result was most of them joined Joshua's main force on the north side of the city, leaving 5,000 to sit in ambush. Well, regardless of how we reconstruct it, the point was the next morning, with the dawn's early light, the king of Ai, or chieftain of Ai, looks out and sees the Israelite body across the ravine to the north of his city. Now, I think it's important the way that works. That was probably a river that cut that ravine going down to the Jordan River, and that brook there could very well have been what was referred to as the Brook of Arabah. Now, the idea that the Israelites were in a ravine apart from Ai is also probably very strategically significant, because it meant that the Israelites had to go down into the ravine before going up to get the city of Ai. Of course, it also meant that the people of Ai, when they went out to attack Israel, had to go down into the ravine to get the people of Israel. So what ends up happening is these two armies start coming at each other. Ai goes down, Israel goes down, they meet each other, Israel goes up, Ai starts going back up, and now what happens is the ambush comes around from behind, goes into the city, there's no soldiers in there, they capture the city, they burn the city. All of a sudden, the men of Ai who are chasing the Israelites uphill look back and they see that their city's on fire, and they turn around, and now all of a sudden the Israelite army has, you guessed it, the high ground, right? That's what happens. And so they chase the Ai soldiers back down into the ravine. The 5,000 come out of the city, coming downhill, and now we've got the soldiers of Ai trapped at the bottom of a ravine that runs east and west, and the Israelites are on the north and south of them, and they absolutely demolish, in fact, they kill every last soldier of Ai. And they take the town, they burn it, and then the king, they bring the king to Joshua, and they kill him, and Joshua hangs him on a tree. Now, we're going to have you look at that phrase in your community group, what it means to hang on a tree. But God had already given legislation about what to do with a body hanged on a tree. Now, later on, this is going to refer to crucifixion. I don't think it does here, because that probably wasn't invented yet, or at least the Israelites didn't know about it yet. It was instead more of a way of disgracing a body. Okay, suspending it between heaven and earth, rejected by man, rejected by God, an emblem of a curse. But since that cursed person was still made in the image of God, God had very specific things that you were supposed to do with that body, and Joshua did follow that. Well, we're going to keep on going here, because the end of this chapter talks about a covenant renewal ceremony. And boy, did the people need to renew that covenant after breaking it in the matter of Achan on that first attack on Ai. And they go to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim in a place that today is called the town of Nablus. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Here's the picture of it. You can see today Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim. Just imagine thousands of Israelites on each side of that valley quoting scripture to each other, reminding themselves of God's faithfulness to them and pledging their own faithfulness back to him. Well, that's as best as I can do as a video tour guide for you. You guys are going to dig into this text tonight, and I hope that you'll be able to see some wonderful things here, see how this applies, and I'm going to turn it over to your community group leader now.